century ago, they brought a monster back to life in the room of his mountain castle. A remote corner of Europe, legendary Transylvania has been barely touched by the 20th century. Here, in the fictional birthplace of Count Dracula, stories of vampires and other monsters echo through these primeval mountains. About 65 million years ago, a real monster stomped this forest, drinking the blood of its innocent victims. Its prey were herds of peaceful plant-eating dinosaurs, creatures such as rapidons, as well as two-legged hadrosaurs and long-necked sauropods. But the dinosaurs of Transylvania were unlike any other. Instead of the giants that inhabited the Cretaceous, they all belonged to a unique race of dwarves. Romania lies on the shore of the Black Sea. At its heart, ringed with mountains, is Transylvania. To the southwest is the town of Hatzeg. Today, in an isolated valley near Hatzeg, a team of Romanian paleontologists are following in the footsteps of the man who first introduced dwarf dinosaurs to the world 100 years ago. Flamboyant, eccentric, and intellectually gifted, this young Transylvanian aristocrat was well prepared for the adventure he was about to embark on. His name was Franz Nopcsa. It all began one summer's day in 1895, when his 12-year-old sister, Baroness Ilonia Nopcsa, was out walking in the hills near the family castle. On the eroded slope, she noticed some unusual fossils. Her discovery sparked a fascination in Nopcsa that would lead to a lifetime of work. Just 18 years old, the young Baron immediately began excavating and classifying bones. Without any formal training, he published his first scientific paper when he was only 22. Paleontologist David Weisample of the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore is writing Nopcsa's biography. He's come to the British Museum of Natural History in London, where Nopcsa's papers and a large collection of his fossils are kept. Nopcsa realized that the bones belonged to dinosaurs, but to his credit, he recognized that they were not new species, but miniature versions of other dinosaurs. The most dramatic were the remains of a sauropod, similar to this skeleton of Diplodocus.
From the tip of its rather dinky head up front to the end of its rather slim tail in the back, it's about 80 feet long, probably weighed, a handful of tons, certainly one of the largest dinosaurs of all times. And what I have in my hand is the arm bone, the humerus, of a similar sort of dinosaur that lived in Romania some 65 million years ago. This was discovered by Franz Nopcsa, and the reason that this is important and a little bizarre, in fact, is because this is a full-size dinosaur. This is a grown-up. This is an adult dinosaur called Magyarosaurus, a sauropod like this one, but it's clearly dwarf.
The site of Franz Nopcsa's original excavation lay undisturbed and ignored. Then, in the 1970s, Professor Dan Grigorescu of the University of Bucharest rediscovered it. Today, he's joined by visiting paleontologist Mike Benton of the University of Bristol in England.
On the bone. Mm-hmm. Just a robot. It's your lucky day.
The site dates back 70 million years to the late Cretaceous. Dinosaurs from this age are common in North America, but they're virtually unknown in Europe, which makes the fossils from Hatzeg extremely important. But piecing them together is not easy. Their bones are in bits and pieces because the dwarf dinosaurs did not die here. Over time, their remains were washed down from the surrounding hills. Scattered and broken by millions of years of erosion, they settled into pockets like pebbles in a stream. For Cora Leogiorno of the Diva Museum, collecting fossils from Hatzeg takes more than hard work.
Here you have to be very lucky to find bones. There are not bone beds as in other parts of the world. So you have to try to find a fossiliferous pocket, and if you are lucky, you find it. But if not, you only find isolated bones, just scattered bones.
But the bones they do find continue to surprise.
This is a thigh bone of a dinosaur called Telmatosaurus. It's the same bone as in my leg here. Here's the knee joint, and this is the upper joint that fits into the hip bones. And this shows that this dinosaur is only 5 or 6 feet tall, which is amazing because normally these kinds of dinosaurs, these big plant-eating dinosaurs, have got a thigh bone which is this long, 5 times the length.
Telmatosaurus was a plant-eating hadrosaur. Found elsewhere in Europe and North America, they were normally up to 10 meters long and weighed 3 tons. But this Romanian dinosaur was no taller than a human and weighed only a tenth as much as its giant cousin. Nopcsa theorized that the only way large dinosaurs could evolve into dwarves was if they were isolated and confined to a small space. But the science of reconstructing ancient environments was in its infancy. No one knew that Hatzeg was once an oasis in a tropical sea. 65 million years ago, Europe was covered by water. Called the Sea of Tethys, it was studded with volcanic islands. To the west of the archipelago, Hatzeg occupied some 7,500 square kilometers. Although its climate has changed dramatically, the landscape of Hatzeg is similar to what it was in the distant past.
When you come up here, above the quarry site, you can see the shape of the land. There are mountains around, and we have to imagine what it was like 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs were here. The mountains would have been islands, and the sea would have come up the sides. It would have been a tropical sea full of corals and fishes, and on land, the dinosaurs moving about on these small islands. Islands are weird places. Some of the most spectacular ones are in the Mediterranean, islands such as Malta and Sicily, where at the end of the ice ages, a few tens of thousands of years ago, you found such amazing things as dwarf elephants and giant dormice living side by side.
Only a handful of animals found on continents migrate to islands, but those who do face new challenges to stay alive.
On an island, it's important to be small. The big animals will die out. Over many generations, that means that the species as a whole will become smaller. And we think this is going to happen within a small number of generations, maybe a few thousand years is enough.
For David Weishampel, the question is how the dinosaurs got there in the first place.
What we're looking at here is the Sea of Tethys, which is today's Mediterranean Sea. It looks rather different than the Mediterranean at present. This is Hatzeg Island, where Nopcsa found his dinosaurs and where he interpreted them as being dwarfs. And it's these islands in the middle that are especially interesting to me. They pop up, they sink down. These are volcanic islands, so very, very active.
Volcanic islands are rooted in the Earth's interior, where titanic forces send earthquakes and molten magma to the surface. The upheaval created temporary land bridges that linked the islands and allowed the dinosaurs to leave the mainland. Over millions of years, the dinosaurs could have island hopped to Hatzeg. When the geologic forces subsided, the land bridges sank back into the sea, cutting off their access. Once isolated, the dinosaurs were left to adapt to their new surroundings. But unknown to Nopcia, the peaceful herbivores were not alone on their island paradise. One more beast had crossed the land bridge. Lurking in the forests of Hatzeg was a predator. It was small, but its weapons were deadly.
Recently we found some teeth belonging to a small carnivorous dinosaur, meat-eating dinosaur. You can observe the tooth, which is very small and flattened and sharp, and also you can observe serration on the margins.
This carnivore is so new it has no name, but it's similar in appearance to Velociraptor, the villain of Jurassic Park. Only 2 meters tall, they were agile, quick, and vicious. Hunting in packs, they attacked and devoured their prey while it was still alive. Rows of serrated teeth and slashing claws could humble even the largest dinosaurs. To a Transylvanian dwarf, they were more terrifying than T-Rex. A clash of tiny titans in a lost prehistoric world. But this vicious behavior was not contained to Hatzeg. Not far away, another midget monster was rearing its head. In a remote area of northern Transylvania, a chance discovery reverberated throughout the scientific world. Deep under the Cornet Hills, bauxite, an ore used in the smelting of aluminium, is mined. In the aftermath of an explosion to open a new seam, 2 miners noticed some unusual fragments. Only when local paleontologists were called in did they realize the full significance of the find. The bauxite was packed with dinosaur bones. Cornet, like Hatzeg, was once an island in the Sea of Tethys, about 40 kilometers across, but much older. It dates back to the beginning of the Cretaceous, 130 million years ago. Since the discovery, 10,000 individual dinosaur bones have been recovered. Today, the mine is being worked by paleontologists Erika Tolodi from the nearby Museum of Arabia and Liz Cook from the University of Bristol.
Yep, it's working okay. Okay, let's go.
What makes this find so exceptional is that dinosaurs from the early Cretaceous have largely disappeared from the fossil record. Because paleontologists know little about what they look like, bones this old are more valuable than precious stones. Excavating them can be a real test of endurance.
It's quite horrible down in the mine. It's very cold, it's very wet, it's smelly. They put pit props up so that the roof isn't going to fall down on us, but the bauxite is quite easy to break. If you're not careful when you're excavating bones, there's always a chance you're going to undercut the rock above you, and in which case it will fall on you.
"50 meters below the ground, Liz and Erika work in 5-hour shifts with only miners' lamps to guide them.
The main problem of working in the mine when you're looking for the fossils is that the fossils are pretty much the same colour as the bauxite. You can think, oh, I've got a piece of rock here with lots of bones in, lug it out to the surface and it's just a big piece of bauxite, which is frustrating.
Preservation of fossils in bauxite is extremely unusual. The ore's reddish-brown colour is due to oxidation, like the rust on a nail. Usually, bones would disintegrate, but for some unknown reason, unique conditions in the mine have stopped the process. Another oddity is how the bones wound up so far underground. 130 million years ago, a rapidly flowing river deposited them deep below the surface in subterranean caverns hollowed out of limestone bedrock. There they accumulated in layers of soil, burying the bauxite. A nearby stream is handy for washing their finds.
Processes on it? Yeah, excellent.
Only now can they see if the efforts paid off.
It's a cutie.
It can be disappointing.
The bone material from this site is all very much broken up, very fragmented. It's been transported in a river such as this, which rounds the bone. And most of them end up looking something like this, just a rounded block of bone. This makes them very difficult to identify, as all you have is just a blob. I think that one's going to need the drill rather than a pin.
After years of back-breaking work and regular frustration, Liz and Erica are finally piecing together the dinosaurs that once lived here. Camptosaurus, common in North America, could be 10 meters long. It lived alongside another herbivore, Valdosaurus, about which little is known. It was small and extremely fast. Because Cornet was also once an island, Liz and Erica want to find out if dwarfing occurred here 60 million years earlier than on Hatzeg.
Is this from a different layer to
So
that one?
far, all the bones they've found are tiny.
White clay, yeah.
This wrist bone from an adult Camptosaurus is 10 times smaller than normal.
We know this came from an adult because it's bone. In a juvenile, it would be cartilage. So obviously this is from an adult animal, but it's very, very small. Much, much smaller than comparable animals from other sites.
Liz and Erica will need more fossils to prove the dinosaurs of Cornet Island were dwarves. But each new nugget they mine is one more glimpse of a world Franz Nopsche could only have dreamed of a century ago. In 1988, near the remote village of Tustia, only 8 kilometers from where Nopsche made his historic discoveries, rocks suddenly cascaded down a hillside. Dan Grigorescu was in Hatzeg when he was summoned to examine a strange-looking object that had been exposed. He knew immediately what it was: the flattened but recognizable shell of a dinosaur egg. Eggs have only been found in a few places around the world, yet 14 were finally uncovered in Hatzeg, making it the most important egg site in Europe. For Grigorescu, it was a dream come true.
The eggs are telling in a very vivid way about how they live. They depict a very interesting thing about their behavior. Finding such things, you enlarge very much the knowledge about the life of dinosaurs.
The crumbly sediments where the eggs were found revealed that this was once the sandy shore of a tropical lake. Like turtles that returned each year to the same beach, generations of dinosaurs may have nested here. An unseasonal flood may have drowned the nest, burying the eggs in the mud that preserved them. At his laboratory in Bucharest, Professor Grigorescu examines his most exciting find yet: the remains of dinosaur babies. These tiny bones belong to the dwarf plant-eater Telmatosaurus, first discovered by Nopsche 100 years ago. They suggest the dinosaur was a nurturing parent. By comparing the thigh bones of several infants, Grigorescu noticed a change in the structure of their legs in the first days after hatching.
This suggests to us that hatchlings were kept in the nest till the bone characters developed enough to allow them to run. So the mother was near the nest for all this time, feeding the nestlings.
The beautifully preserved eggs concealed another surprise. The unusually thick shell is covered with thousands of bumpy nodules. In this magnified image, a ring of tiny pores appears encircling each nodule. The pores allow the baby dinosaur to breathe while incubating and any excess moisture to evaporate. There are over 200 per square centimetre, twice as many as found on other dinosaur eggs. They speak of an environment that was very humid, perhaps as high as 95%, a revelation that intrigued paleontologists who had long thought dinosaurs avoided nesting in wet conditions. But Telmatosaurus thrived here. Incubating their eggs in warm sand kept them at a constant temperature. After 50 to 60 days, the dinosaur infants were mature enough to hatch. To avoid damaging the unhatched eggs, Grigorescu used a CAT scan to peer inside. This small white form is the body of a barely formed Telmatosaurus embryo curled up and undisturbed for over 65 million years. Sadly, Nopcsa never lived to witness these astonishing new discoveries. Caught up in the turmoil of the First World War, he lost his home and his fortune. Until recently, Nopcsa's castle was used as an orphanage, but now it lies abandoned and empty. Although he continued to publish, his theories and ideas never gained acceptance. Ostracized, penniless, and in a fit of depression, he took his own life in a room in Vienna. Cora Leajornu often makes the trip to Nopcsa's castle, only a few kilometers away from the Hatzeg Valley, where his sister first discovered the bones.
When I first came to the castle, I was very nervous and at the same time very curious, because entering this castle, I know I will meet some ghosts. There are ghosts here.
Without Nopcsa's groundbreaking discovery, Cora Leajornu's own research would have been impossible. After almost 100 years, the ghost of the young Baron can finally rest. Despite the tragedy of his life, Franz Nopcsa's work continues to blaze a trail for a whole new generation of paleontologists, inspiring new discoveries and insights into the world of dwarf dinosaurs. It's often been said, you are what you eat. Back in the days of bobby socks and varsity sweaters, the local diner was more than just a restaurant. It was a way of life. These days, paleontologists believe that when dinosaurs stepped out for a bite to eat, they told us all about themselves as well. It's a story mirrored in the day-to-day operations of a place like the Dino Diner. Like us, dinosaurs had very definite eating habits, from strict vegetarians to meat eaters. And like any huge machine, they needed enormous amounts of fuel. In fact, all the food served at the Dino Diner in a day may not equal the size of one portion when a hungry sauropod sat down to lunch. Jim Farlow at the University of Indiana is a dino gourmet. and he's worked out how much food the biggest dinosaur of them all, the sauropod, would have needed just to keep that huge body stoked with fuel.
Well, we know how much animals of various sizes today eat, and so we can get some calculations of how much you would expect an animal to eat for a given size, if it's either warm-blooded or cold-blooded. And for a 70-ton sauropod, if it were warm-blooded, it'd eat a couple million kilojoules a day. Okay, you don't know what that is. Well, it's about that much hay.
Mm. 17 bales of hay is more than a lot of creatures eat in a month. But if sauropods were warm-blooded, a question still hotly debated among paleontologists, that's the minimum they would have needed. And because Jim knows that sauropods didn't have any food as nutritious as hay, he's calculated a warm-blooded creature would have spent at least 22 hours of every day eating.
And that doesn't leave much time for other activities like sleeping or making baby sauropods. So I don't think they were warm-blooded. I think it more likely that they were cold-blooded. And based on what we see in cold-blooded animals today, we can estimate that the amount of food a 70-ton sauropod would need if cold-blooded would be about that much, 6 bales of hay.
Where did sauropods find their food? Some paleontologists think their long neck allowed them to frequent the most out-of-the-way of ancient eating establishments, the treetops. But is that how they ate?
We're 50, 60 feet off the ground and well within the range of the neck of a really big sauropod. The argument has been that maybe the heart wouldn't have been strong enough to pump the blood up to the brain when the neck is way up high. The problem then would have been if there's not enough blood to the brain, the animal might have fainted, and for a 70-ton animal to faint and hit the ground would be not very good. So a lot of people argue that maybe they used their necks horizontally and fed close to the ground, like a gigantic vacuum cleaner. And they may well have done that, but I suspect that they did a little bit of both.
By shopping in both the street-level and high-rise supermarkets of the day, sauropods found the key to supporting the largest body the world has ever known. Even so, they would have needed an enormous area to feed in.
I would guess that a cold-blooded 70-ton sauropod, if you were putting it on really good pasture land like we have here in Indiana today, you might have needed something like 25 acres to support it.
And yet we know the quality of merchandise back then was not nearly as nutritious as modern-day plants. So each sauropod may have needed more than 120 hectares to satisfy its appetite.
So you can kind of visualize them as gigantic multi-ton locusts moving over the landscape, stripping it clean, and then moving on to feed elsewhere.
There you go.
But for confirmed vegetarians, feeding on relatively unnutritious plants just didn't provide the kind of energy a growing creature needed, unless they ate an awful lot. Meat eaters had it a little easier. With each bite packed full of nutrition, they didn't have to eat as much or as often.
Right now, I'm rather glad I'm not a plant. There's plenty, no rushing here. An herbivore like these cattle is going after a lot of spread out, dispersed, not in themselves very nutritious kinds of food. A carnivore on the other, easy, watch the foot. A carnivore, on the other hand, is going after big packets of food that is of very high quality, a lot of protein content, a lot of energy content. This guy, for example, looks delicious.
Because high-energy meat meals were much harder to find and catch, there were far fewer carnivores. But at least they didn't have to shop nearly as often.
If a Tyrannosaurus were lucky enough to kill a Triceratops, it would get to feed on an animal about the same size as it is. It would probably gorge itself, you know, guts flying everywhere, bones crunching, the big teeth ripping out the flesh. Your worst nightmare. It would probably eat most of its own body weight, I would guess. And then if it were cold-blooded, it doesn't have to eat anything for a very long time. That single meal might last it months, perhaps even an entire year before it'd have to go looking for food again.
But if you're not as big as a T-Rex, then you can't wolf down a year's worth of food in one sitting.
Is he going to stay the night?
Smaller meat-eating dinosaurs had to have a very different shopping strategy. The vicious Deinonychus had eyes too big for their stomachs, too small by themselves to catch the big meals they craved. They preferred dining in a communal setting. Lacking the teeth to tear through tough flesh, Deinonychus used a much more lethal utensil, a spring-loaded retractable claw that would carve so deep into even the largest sauropods, their stomachs would fall out. So even the largest dinosaurs of all were vulnerable to smaller predators that attacked in packs. The best chefs often search long and hard for seasonal and difficult-to-find delicacies. In the dinosaur world, you had to be prepared to go out of your way and resort to any means to find your favorite meal.
One brown burger, one curly fries.
Back in the kitchen, the chef toasts, fries, and chops, preparing the raw ingredients he'll need to cook. A couple of 100 million years ago, dinosaurs had their own means of preparing meals to their liking. In this laboratory at the University of California, Greg Erickson believes he has discovered how one predator prepared his favorite dish. Greg began with the leftovers from a prehistoric meal, a giant mauled bone, but experimented using a modern bone with similar properties.
Looks pretty good. Let's go with it.
The bone originally belonged to a triceratops, a 7-ton creature with deadly horns and heavy armor. The mauled section was from the formidable pelvis of this tank-like creature. It had obviously been through more than one battle. Its final fight was clearly a losing effort.
When I first saw the pelvis, it had all kinds of punctures and gouges in it. We counted about 60 bite marks in it, and there's about 20 others that are probable bite marks, but they kind of overlie one another. There were some punctures that were about 3.5 inches in depth. There were cut marks that were about 8 inches in length. So it basically looked like a giant dog had been gnawing on this huge bone and kind of really worked it over.
Greg first needed to identify what made the bite marks. A large crocodile was a strong possibility. But Greg had a hunch the marks belonged to the largest carnivore that ever lived, Tyrannosaurus rex. In Indonesia today, the fearsome Komodo dragon uses a similar technique, clamping down with its teeth, levering its lunch into the air and tearing it apart. But for Greg to be certain that T-Rex had been gnawing on the Triceratops bone, he first had to make a copy of the bite marks.
What we did is we took dental putty. This is the sort of putty your dentist uses to make casts of your teeth. And we took a big wad of this and we pushed it down into one of the deeper puncture marks. And when we pulled it out, it came out looking very similar to an actual adult Tyrannosaurus rex tooth.
Now that Greg knew the culprit, the next step was working out how the dish was prepared. He placed a bronze cast of the T-Rex tooth on a hydraulic loading frame. When the loading pressure was increased to create bite marks that matched those on the Triceratops' pelvis, Greg knew he had effectively simulated the bite force of a T-Rex.
Well, it's hard to fathom the magnitude of the forces involved here as this tooth is punching through these bones. It's almost like a hot knife cutting through butter. It certainly convinced me at that point that T-Rex was quite a mean, rough fellow.
Greg calculated the bite force at 1,300 kilos, roughly 10 times stronger than a great white shark. It meant that T-Rex had the bite strength to devour creatures its own size, even a 7-ton Triceratops.
What is 3,000 pounds equal to? Well, it'd be like, say, if you took this tooth, were to set it on top of yourself, let's say, and set a pickup truck on top of the tooth then, you can imagine it would punch quite a hole in you. So it was quite a large amount of force. I think certainly it could open its mouth 2.5 feet. I expect they could take a pretty good chunk of meat out of whatever they bit into, maybe 50, 75 pounds of flesh, about equivalent to maybe a hind quarter of a cow today. I think you could probably stuff in there pretty reasonably without too much trouble.
Greg's study has proved the teeth of a T-Rex could withstand the stresses of biting into struggling prey, and he thinks this sheds some light on an age-old mystery. Was it merely a scavenger of dead dinosaurs, or was it the meanest fighter of them all?
Well, sometimes I wonder how strongly other scientists believe that this animal actually was a scavenger. I mean, if you were to say, put all of us that believe that T-Rex was a predator and all of us that believe that it was a scavenger and put us all out, say, on a football field and put a Tyrannosaur at one end of that football field, I'd be willing to bet there wouldn't be too many scientists standing in the middle of the field when that Tyrannosaur started rambling towards the midfield. I know that I would probably be one of the first people heading out the stadium tunnel.
So, based on how a T-Rex ate, paleontologists have concluded it was probably agile and fast. The dagger-like horns of a Triceratops were a dangerous defense. To survive, the T-Rex must have used stealth and a final rapid dash to avoid a serious encounter with one of those deadly horns. But at times, T-Rex must have met its match. When humans overindulge, we can resort to an array of pills and potions. Dinosaurs had their own remedies for a bad case of indigestion. Whether it's cordon bleu or a simple salad bar, cooking is the art of combining the ingredients to the customer's liking. Dinosaurs had their own internal food processors to produce the nourishment they needed. Peter Dodson of the University of Pennsylvania loves a big meal, and he's fascinated with the mechanics of digestion in the really big eaters of the dinosaur world.
How did they get it all down? Well, if they ate very succulent foods like these grapes, which I'm stomping on, grapes are very easy to crush and release the nutrition. But there were no grapes back in the sauropods' day, and very few succulent foods. They had to eat very tough, fibrous foods. How did they deal with this?
Sauropods had terrible table manners, often swallowing their food whole. But that meant it had to be broken down in their stomachs, And because much of the food was tough, leafy tissue with very little nutrition, they had to eat prodigious amounts. For Peter here again, eating habits are a window into the dinosaurs' world.
Their ability to process plant food was rather limited. This suggests that the energy flow, their energy budgets were rather modest. And these very same dinosaurs, sauropods, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, had the smallest brains of all dinosaurs. So this suggests that their overall lifestyle was a rather slow pace. These were the Model T Fords of the dinosaur world.
Dinosaurs that swallow large amounts of whole or hard-to-digest food have to work overtime simply to extract what little nutrition the food possessed. How they actually did that was a mystery, until recently discovered fossils revealed that dinosaurs, presumably as a sort of aperitif, swallowed stones to help their digestion.
Sauropods were eating fibrous leaf material, and by themselves, leaves are hard to digest. The stomach is a very muscular organ, so as the stomach churned a great mass of stones rubbed against each other, and they rubbed against the plant material too. And as they tumbled, the plant material was nicely broken up into small fragments, which are much more easily digested.
But stones were only the beginning. Like cows, dinosaurs relied on microbes in their stomachs to aid digestion and break down their food into a form they could easily convert to energy.
A 70-ton sauropod dinosaur is an enormous animal, and the size of its fermentation vat would have been staggering. We reckon it was somewhere around 10 tons. That would have been equivalent to 30 barrels of wine. 30 barrels.
But like anyone who overindulges, a 10-ton fermentation vat for a stomach would have produced side effects.
Fermentation is a chemical process which produces large quantities of gas. And our giant sauropod was fermenting 10 tons of plant material. It must have produced prodigious quantities of gas. In a word, it produced wind.
What someone eats can tell us a lot about them. But for one scientist, the interesting part starts when the eating is finished. After all is said and done and eaten, all creatures must relieve themselves of unwanted leftovers. To one scientist, even that can tell us a lot about how dinosaurs lived. Karen Chin of the University of Santa Barbara is a connoisseur of dinosaur dung. There is a lot to be found if you know what to look for, but it's not a field everyone finds appetizing.
Actually, when you first start looking at dinosaur dung, it doesn't look like your typical fossil dung that you'll find in museums. Most of that is rather, sausage shape, or looks quite a bit like dog droppings. So we had to find other ways to determine that this indeed is fossil dung.
On the vast Montana plains where Karen does her fieldwork, it's not as though she has to watch where she steps. 100-million-year-old dung is as difficult to find as it is to identify. But considering the gigantic proportions of some dinosaurs, Karen received help from creatures much smaller than she ever expected. Dung beetles have been around for over 200 million years, surviving then off the dung of dinosaurs, just as they do off the droppings of mammals today. The beetles excavated through the fresh dung, creating an underground network of tunnels. Each new tunnel was later filled in by sediment, leaving the dung full of vertical tubes of different material.
What they would do is stuff dung down into the sediment and lay an egg right in that dung. And the young grubs, when they hatch out, would have plenty to eat in those provisioned burrows.
Dinosaur dung is known as a trace fossil. It leaves no direct clues as to who left it. But there is plenty of circumstantial evidence. The first clue lay scattered around Karen's study site in the shadows of the Rockies. Thousands of pieces of bone, all from the same creature. A duck-billed dinosaur called Maiasaura. The second clue also pointed to Maiasaura. The dung was full of very finely chewed fibrous material, which could easily have been produced by the battery of grinding teeth in the mouth of a duck-billed dinosaur. The final clue was the size of the droppings themselves. Most fossilized dinosaur dung has shattered over the years under the impact of the weather. But by carefully putting these pieces back together, Karen calculates the average size of these droppings as the equivalent of 5 liters of dung.
So you can imagine that the dinosaur that produced this mass of fecal material must have been a fairly good-sized dinosaur. And the Maiasaura was approximately 24 feet long and was certainly capable of producing quite a bit of dung.
In her latest study, Karen believes that the answer to one of the paleontologist's greatest mysteries has come right out of the dinosaurs themselves. From the very bottom of the food chain, Karen has found bits of bone from the very top.
In the piece of probable T-Rex dung, we found bits and pieces of bone. And by examining these pieces of bone, we were able to tell that these were actually pieces of dinosaur bone. So this is really exciting information because for years and years and years, we've been speculating what these large carnivorous dinosaurs were feeding on. But now we actually have direct evidence by looking at the dung that tyrannosaurs did actually feed on other dinosaurs.
All over the globe, scientists are beginning to reconstruct a much better picture of what life was like millions of years ago. Clues to dinosaur behavior keep popping up in some of the most unlikely places. And what they ate and why tells us a lot about their daily routine. Almost as if we'd found a sauropod's diary, giving us a day-to-day view of the likes and dislikes of these remarkable creatures.